Right now, a manhunt underway for a suspect accused of killing 2 people in St. Bernard Parish. Detectives are looking for Lee Collins III. They say he shot and killed his mother and grandmother Easter Sunday on Sentani Drive, and then attempted to kill his father. Asterisk. A son sat at the same table as his mother on Easter Sunday. He looked at her face. He knew her voice. He had grown up in that house, eaten in that kitchen, been raised by that woman. And before that night was over, he picked up a gun and used it on her. That is not a headline. That is not a statistic. That is what happened on Sentani Drive in St. Bernard Parish, Louisiana, on the night of April the 5th, 2026. And the details of how it unfolded, the sequence of choices that were made inside that house, are going to stay with you long after this video ends. Drop a comment right now and tell me, where are you watching from, and what time is it over there? I want to know who is out here with me on this one. And if you are new to this channel, hit that subscribe button and tap that like button right now. It takes 2 seconds, and it helps more people find stories that deserve to be told. This is Dark Evidence Lab. Let's get into it. Most people who think about Easter Sunday picture the same kind of day. A table with food on it. Family members who maybe do not see each other as often as they should. Some tension here and there, because that is just what family is. But you get through it. You eat together. You make it work. That was supposed to be the night of April the 5th, 2026, inside a home on Sentani Drive in St. Bernard Parish, Louisiana. 4 people were in that house that evening. A mother, her mother, a father, and a 22-year-old son. A family sitting together on one of the few days a year where most families decide, without saying it out loud, that whatever is broken between them can wait. That whatever has been building under the surface does not need to come out today. Not on Easter. But it came out anyway. And by the time the night was over, 2 of those 4 people were dead. 1 was running. And 1 was left standing inside that house trying to make sense of the fact that he was still alive. The 2 women who did not survive that night were Trenelle Collins and her mother, Mary Major. Trenelle was 55 years old. Mary was 75. I want to take a moment here, because in stories like this one, the people who were lost can get buried under all the details of what happened and who is being hunted. And that is not how this story gets told on this channel. Trenelle and Mary were mother and daughter living under the same roof. 2 generations, side by side, sharing a home the way families do when their bond is strong enough to make that kind of closeness feel natural rather than complicated. You do not share your space with your 75-year-old mother because it is convenient. You do it because that is simply what love looks like in your family. You show up for each other. Every single day. And that instinct, the instinct to show up, to move toward the people you love when they are in danger instead of away from them, is the single most important thing you need to understand about Mary Major. Because on the night of April the 5th, when voices in that house started to rise, when an argument between a son and his mother started to turn into something uglier and louder, Mary did not go to another room. She did not close a door and wait for it to pass. She stepped in. 75 years old. She stepped in. That is who she was. That is the woman we are talking about. And it is the last decision she ever made. The argument that night started between Lee Collins III and his mother, Trenelle. Lee Collins III was 22 years old. He lived in that home. This was not a stranger who came through a door. This was a son, raised in that house, known by those women, loved by them. We do not know exactly what the argument was about. The specific words, the specific trigger, the thing that pushed it past the point of raised voices. None of that has been made public. What we know from Sheriff James Pullman of the St. Bernard Parish Sheriff's Office is that it started as a verbal argument between Collins and his mother, and it escalated. Now here is where I need you to slow down with me. Because this next detail is the one that changes everything about how you understand what happened in that house. When things got heated, Collins did not grab the nearest object. He did not swing or strike in one single moment of pure, uncontrolled rage. He left the room. He walked away from his mother, moved to another part of that house, located a weapon, and then he turned around and walked back. That gap, however short it was, is everything. That is not a man who lost himself completely in one split second and could not stop what his hands were doing. That is a man who had a moment, a space between what he was feeling and what he chose to do next. A window where a different decision was possible. He had time to stop. He knew where he was going. He knew what he was picking up. And he came back through that door anyway. When he walked back into that room, Trenelle was still there. So was Mary. Because Mary Major was not built to stand at a distance while something happened to her daughter. Not at 30. Not at 50. Not at 75. That was not in her nature, and it was not something age had changed about her. She had moved toward the situation the same way she had probably moved toward every hard thing in her family's life. Directly, without hesitation, with her whole self. Collins raised that weapon. He looked at a woman who had known him from the day he was born, a woman who had loved him his whole life, who had sat across from him at tables like the one they were supposed to be sitting at that Easter evening. And he pulled the trigger. He shot Trenelle. He shot Mary. And then he turned the gun toward his father, who was also in that room. His father was shot at. His father survived. Not because Collins chose in that moment to spare him. Not because something inside him stopped. The shot missed. And Sheriff Pullman said something in his press conference that I have not been able to stop thinking about since I heard it. He said he is not sure Collins even realized the shot had missed. That in that moment, it is unclear whether his own father's survival even registered. Read that again slowly. A man fired a gun at his own father, and may not have even noticed whether his father was still standing. That tells you everything about the state of mind moving through that house that night. Individual lives, including the life of his own father, a man he had known every day of his 22 years, had stopped fully registering. And then he ran. He left on foot. Out of the house. Out of the neighborhood. Into the dark on Easter Sunday night in St. Bernard Parish, Louisiana. But he did not stay on foot for long. Somewhere close to Sentani Drive, Collins found a white 2019 Ford stake bed truck parked outside a nearby business. Surveillance footage captured him taking it. Louisiana license plate, Zulu 2580337. That truck became the most critical piece of information in the hours that followed, because it was the only thing law enforcement had to chase. Back on Sentani Drive, St. Bernard Parish Sheriff's Office deputies arrived at the 2200 block at approximately 7:45 that evening. They found two women with gunshot wounds. Both Trenelle Collins and Mary Major were transported immediately to University Medical Center. The medical staff did everything in their power. It was not enough. Both women were pronounced dead. Detectives moved without delay. Family members present at the scene gave investigators enough information to identify Lee Collins III as the suspect within the first hours. An arrest warrant was drawn up, 2 counts of second-degree murder. And somewhere on Interstate 10, that white stake bed truck was still moving east, heading toward the Mississippi state line. Sheriff James Pullman made a decision that night that I think is worth paying attention to. While the manhunt was still active, while Collins had not been found, while the investigation was still in its earliest hours, Pullman stepped in front of cameras and spoke directly to the public. He gave the truck description, the full plate number, the direction of travel, the tip line numbers, everything, out loud, while it was all still happening. That was not a routine press conference. That was a calculated move. In a fugitive case, the first 24 hours are not just important, they are almost everything. Every hour a suspect is not found is another hour they use to put distance between themselves and where they started. Another hour to abandon a vehicle, change clothes, find somewhere to disappear. Every hour that passes makes the search harder. Pullman knew that no database and no camera system was going to close this case faster than a person who picked up a phone. Someone always knows something, or sees something, or gets a call they were not expecting. The anonymous tip line exists specifically for the person who has information but is afraid to say it out loud with their name attached. That person was somewhere out there. Pullman was talking directly to them. License plate reader systems in both Louisiana and Mississippi tracked the truck crossing the state line at approximately 9 o'clock that same evening, moving east on Interstate 10. That gave investigators a direction, a corridor to work. But Mississippi does not end at the state line. And a man who abandons a stolen truck and walks away from it becomes a very different kind of search problem. 3 separate tip lines were made public. The St. Bernard Parish Sheriff's Office main line, the Criminal Investigations Bureau hotline, and Crime Stoppers GNO, where a caller can stay completely anonymous and may be eligible for a cash reward. 3 channels, all of them built on the same understanding, that in a case like this, with community roots and family ties, the investigation eventually comes down to one person deciding they cannot stay quiet anymore. And while that search was underway, While agencies across 2 states were coordinating and tip lines were open and that plate number was being pushed out to every law enforcement system in the region, there was a quieter story happening at the same time. The one happening inside the houses near Sentani Drive. St. Bernard Parish is not a community where this kind of violence is part of the expected rhythm of life. Sheriff Pullman described it plainly. Homicides in that parish are rare. 3 a year on average. Maybe. A neighborhood like that one on Sentani Drive does not have a template for processing what happened on Easter Sunday night. People in that area went to sleep that night knowing that somewhere nearby, 2 women were dead, a mother and her mother, and that the young man who had grown up in their community, who had been seen in those streets, who had been known to people around him as someone without a record, without a history of trouble, without any sign that something like this was building inside him, was on a highway heading away from everything he had destroyed. That is not a thing a neighborhood shakes off. And here is the part that sits hardest with me about the community picture in this case. Sheriff Pullman confirmed that Collins had no significant criminal history. He had never been in serious trouble. He had been homeschooled. By all outside appearances, he was not a person the system had flagged, not a person the neighbors had reason to fear, which means every person who knew him, every person who had seen him around that neighborhood, who had exchanged words with him, who thought they had a reasonable read on who he was, woke up on April the 6th having to completely revise that picture. You are not just grieving the women who were lost. You are also sitting with the disorientation of learning that someone you thought you understood contains something you never got close to seeing. That is a specific kind of weight that does not have a clean name. And it is sitting on that community right now. There is one person in this story who I keep coming back to, who I think needs more space than he has been given. The father. He has not been publicly named. I am not going to name him here. But I want you to sit with what his reality looks like right now. He was in that room. He watched what happened to his wife. He watched what happened to her mother. He was shot at. And he survived, not because his son chose to let him live, but because a bullet missed. And the person who fired that bullet is his own son. He gave what he knew to investigators that night, and then he was left, wherever he was taken after, inside a version of reality that almost no one has ever had to navigate. His wife is gone. His mother-in-law is gone. His son pulled the trigger on both of them. And he is a survivor and a witness at the same time, which means at some point, when this case reaches a courtroom, he will be asked to carry all of that back into a room and say it out loud in front of a jury. There is no framework for that grief. No language built to hold all of those things at once. No version of moving forward that is clean or simple or makes any kind of sense from the outside. What support he has around him. Whether the people in that community are holding him up. Whether he has anyone sitting with him in that house or whatever space he is in right now. None of that is on record. But he is real. And he is somewhere right now living inside something most of us will never be asked to carry. Now I want to talk about Collins himself in those hours after he ran. Because this matters for understanding the shape of the investigation. He had a vehicle. He had a head start. And he had something that actually makes a fugitive more unpredictable rather than less. No prior experience running from anything. Collins had no significant criminal record, which means he had never done this before. He had no practiced knowledge of how to disappear. No established network. No safe house waiting somewhere. No experience with what law enforcement does and how fast they move once a warrant is in the system. A first-time fugitive with no connections and no experience is a different kind of problem than a career criminal who knows exactly how these situations work. They are harder to predict. They do not follow patterns that investigators have seen before. He might reach out to someone he trusts, a friend, a family member, someone who has no idea what has happened and picks up the phone without knowing what they are walking into. He might abandon the truck the moment he realizes it has been identified and then make a completely unpredictable next move based on wherever he happens to be standing when he steps out of it. He might simply drive until the fuel runs out and figure out what comes next from wherever the road ends. None of those scenarios had been confirmed at the time of this recording. What was confirmed is that as the first full day after the shooting began, April the 6th, 2026, Lee Collins III was still not in custody. And every hour that continued was another hour the people left behind on Sentani Drive had to sit inside that reality and wait. The legal side of this case, once Collins is apprehended, is not complicated. 2 counts of second-degree murder under Louisiana law. Second-degree murder in Louisiana carries a mandatory sentence of life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. There is no range of outcomes here. There is no version of the charges where the sentencing becomes a question mark. The charge is clear. The mandatory sentence is clear. The only open question, the only thing this investigation is waiting on, is when Lee Collins III will be standing in a courtroom to face it. What remains publicly unknown is the motive. The argument that started everything that night. What it was about. How long something had been building inside that household. Beneath the surface, away from any record. Invisible to anyone outside those four walls. Whether there had been other moments, other incidents, other warning signs that never made it into any official system. None of that has been disclosed. Sheriff Pullman confirmed that Collins had no meaningful criminal record, which tells us the system had never been given a reason to intervene before that night. But the absence of a record is not the absence of a history. Families carry things that never get written down anywhere. Pressures, fractures, patterns of tension that exist entirely between the walls of a home and never travel beyond them. Whatever was alive inside that household, whatever had been accumulating between Collins and his mother, whatever dynamic existed that none of us on the outside had any window into, it has not been spoken about publicly. And it may not be until he is sitting in front of a judge. The stolen truck, the white 2019 Ford stake bed, plate Zulu 258037, had not been confirmed as recovered at the time this video was recorded. Whether Collins was still behind the wheel of that truck or had abandoned it somewhere and found another way to move, unknown. An abandoned truck changes the shape of the search significantly. If it surfaces somewhere without him attached to it, investigators get a new location but lose the one piece of physical evidence that had been keeping him trackable. The corridor either narrows or widens depending on where it turns up and what is around it. What law enforcement was working with as this case stood, a direction of travel, a plate in circulation across multiple state systems, an open warrant, and a community full of people who knew this family. And one of those people, somewhere, almost certainly knows something. If you are watching this and something in what I just said connects with something you know, if you saw that truck on that night, if you have heard from Collins since April the 5th, if you know someone he might reach out to or somewhere he might go, 3 lines are open right now, and one of them allows you to stay completely anonymous. The St. Bernard Parish Sheriff's Office, 504-271-2501. The Criminal Investigations Bureau Tip Hotline, 504-271-8477. And Crime Stoppers GNO, 504-822-1111. Anonymous, and potentially eligible for a cash reward. Make the call. Trenelle Collins was 55 years old. Mary Major was 75 years old. They deserved to walk out of that house on Easter Sunday. They deserved another spring. Another table set with food. Another year of showing up for each other the way they always had. Mary deserved to grow old without stepping in front of something that should never have been pointed at anyone in that room. Trenelle deserved to see what her family looked like 5, 10, 20 years from now. They deserved more Easters. The fact that they did not get them is not something that gets set aside while the legal process works itself out. It is not something that waits for a courtroom date to be assigned. It is something 2 families and 1 community in St. Bernard Parish are living with right now, today, in real time, while the man who made that choice on April the 5th is still somewhere on the other side of a state line. That weight does not lift until there is an answer. Right now, there is not one. But there will be. If this story hit you the way it hit me, hit that like button right now. It takes 1 second, and it means more than you think for this channel. Subscribe to Dark Evidence Lab so you never miss a case when it drops. And drop a comment below. Tell me where you are watching from and what time is it over there right now as you are watching this. I read every single one. If you know someone who needs to hear this story, share this video. Put it in front of them. These women deserve to have their names spoken. We will be back with another case. Another truth that needs to be heard. Stay with Dark Evidence Lab.